Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the third of the Western New York PRISM Spring 2020 webinar series. My name is Nuessle. I'm the Terrestrial Project Manager for Western New York PRISM. So today we're mostly going to be talking about boot brush stations, what they are, our pilot program in which we provide materials to partners, and of course the construction instructions as well. But we're also going to talk about how you can and what you can do to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species in your daily activities. Even though most of you, I know because I can see the participant list, are familiar with Western New York PRISM and invasive species in general, I'm still going to go through a little bit of that in case we do get some new people joining us. So, Western New York PRISM is one of the 8 PRISMs that cover all of New York State. We work in the 8 westernmost counties of New York State. We work to increase invasive species awareness and protect and restore the biodiversity of our region by identifying and evaluating invasive species threats to aquatic and terrestrial resources. However, I think one of the largest functions of Western New York PRISM is connecting and informing a region and statewide network of partner organizations. Invasive species management requires collaboration and long-term commitments, none of which we could do all by ourselves. If you are interested in checking out more about Western New York PRISM, please check out our website at westernnewyorkprism.org. So, invasive species in general. What differentiates invasive species from your typical pest, weed, or nuisance species? According to New York State, an invasive species is one that is non-native to the ecosystem under consideration and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. The impacts invasive species cause can be wide-ranging and are usually a combination of all 3 of these categories, the economic, environmental, and human health. To go through these quickly, economic impacts are the most straightforward to measure because you can usually put a dollar sign behind them. These are things such as decreases in agricultural yields, impacts on recreation or tourism, and of course the sheer cost of managing invasive species on your own land. Environmental impacts such as loss of biodiversity, change in ecosystem function, and natural processes are a little harder to quantify, but also extremely important to consider. Lastly, invasive species can have impacts on human health, either directly with species such as wild parsnip or giant hogweed, or indirectly with changes in soil, water, and air quality. So anytime that we go out to education and outreach events or do presentations such as this, we want to make sure that we're giving people a take-home message, and one of those take-home messages is prevention. What can you do in your daily lives to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species? So before we get into the boot brush station part of the webinar, we're going to go through a few other prevention campaigns. So the one that's up right now, PlantWise New York. That one is an initiative that was started to inform people about the benefits of planting native in their own gardens on their own properties. It basically lays out plant this native and not this invasive. When you're thinking about what plants to use in your landscaping, please consider using native plants. They are beautiful, but they're also acclimated to our weather, provide forage and habitat for our pollinators and wildlife, and also do not spread like invasive species to nearby local areas and outcompete native plants. So please consider planting natives in your landscaping. Another one is Habitatitude. This initiative encourages us to be responsible pet owners. If you have an aquarium at home, we ask that you do not dump any aquarium fish or plant species into local waterways. If they start to outgrow the aquarium or something like that, we want you to not do that. Dumping those species can create new populations in these local waterways that can spread to other populations, which is what we're trying to avoid. So the next one up is don'tmovefirewood.org. Basic outline here is please do not move firewood up to 50 miles away from where you're cutting it. The basic idea here is that you don't know what is in that wood. There could be larvae, there could be adults of invasive insects, The insect that is pictured here is the Asian longhorn beetle. Thankfully, we do not have that in Western New York, but a similar campaign was used for the emerald ash borer, which I'm sure most people are pretty familiar with. So then another big one is the clean, drain, dry. This is what we have up to 20 boat stewards out at boat launches all throughout Western New York, asking boaters and anglers to clean, drain, and dry their boats, kayaks, jet skis, to make sure that they're not bringing invasive species from one water body to another. And then, of course, there is PlayCleanGo. This is an initiative that is basically asking people to be aware of their recreational activities and what that might mean for moving invasive species around, such as hiking, biking, horseback riding. I'll talk a little bit more about PlayCleanGo in a little bit. So these are all prevention campaigns that we want you guys to keep in mind as you move forward throughout your daily activities. I grew up and have lived in Western New York most of my life. The pictures here are some amazing places to visit, some of which I've been able to visit through my position with Western New York PRISM that I've had for the last couple of years. Not only are these places beautiful, but they're also ecologically important. We want to protect these areas for our native flora and fauna and because of the ecosystem functions and services that they provide. But of course, with amazing places comes people who have the tendency to spread invasive species around. To get into the bulk of our presentation today, what is a boot brush station? It is an increasingly popular tool that educates the public about invasive species and prevents their spread along hiking trails. Basically, it's any combination of an interpretive sign about invasive species and a brush together in one nice little package. Normally, these are placed at trailheads, parking, or other high-use areas, which are very common pathways of invasion. The idea here, one of the best things to do, is to use these boot brush stations after you complete a hike. If you were hiking out at one of your favorite places and you picked up invasive species, if you use these boot brush stations at the end of the day, you're leaving any of those invasive species on site where you might have picked them up. So that's boot brush stations in general. Since 2017, Western New York PRISM, in conjunction with our partner organizations, have installed 24 boot brush stations throughout Western New York. We have 7 more planned for installation this year, as you can see with the differentiation between the blue and the yellow on the maps that are up right now. We try to prioritize new boot brush stations based on proximity to other boot brush stations. Since Western New York operates in 8 counties, our goal in the next few years is to work with our partners to install a boot brush station in each county of our region. We also prioritize for early detection species. These 2 areas that I just outlined in red are areas that are confirmed infestations of mile-a-minute vine and early detection priority in Western New York. So ideally, we'd like to have boot brush stations to first inform trail users to keep a lookout for these species and to prevent their establishment in new areas. Lastly, we prioritize new boot brush stations on trails that are going to be busy and reach the greatest number of people. That's why the presence of boot brush stations in really popular state parks, such as Letchworth and Whirlpool State Park, are so important. It seems a little silly to install a boot brush station in a very low-use area. So, this is a boot brush station sign. So boot brush stations would only be a boot brush without the educational sign attached. I have to say that our Education Outreach Program Manager is the brains behind developing these signs, so she knows a bit more than I do. And I'll have her contact info at the end of this presentation. This is just one example of signs that we've made over the years. We like to feature an early detection priority species on the top. This species may not necessarily be in the area under consideration, but we like to select one that is possible or likely to show up where the boot brush station is installed, giving proximity to other infestations or habitat suitability models. We featured this early detection species, so those who read the sign are then on the lookout for this species and are more likely to notify us of its presence when it does show up. Typically, the remaining 3 species are a mix of both absent, so we can detect new infestations early, and present species. Each of the descriptions includes information about what the species does to the ecosystem, as well as some physical characteristics or a description of how the species spreads. In terms of customization, We also include all of our organization's requisite logos, including our funders, the DEC, and our host organization, Buffalo State's Great Lakes Center. Lastly, right below our collection of logos is our funding statement. And then you'll also notice the large PlayCleanGo logo as well. This signage is a template available through PlayCleanGo. So, there are a couple of ways to get this sign. The first is directly through PlayCleanGo. You can check out playcleango.org, and under Resources, visit the Graphics page. There are a lot of great resources available, but we're interested in the Boot Brush Trail sign on their website for this presentation. From here, you can customize the sign however you want in a PDF format. Alternatively, you can partner with PlayCleanGo, which offers graphic design assistance to help you customize your sign to your preferred species and logos. As you can see on the slide, partnering with PlayCleanGo does cost some money. Please take a look at the playcleango.org for more information. And as I said, our Education and Outreach Program Manager, Emily Thiel, may be able to help you with any questions that you have as well. So lastly, if you represent an organization in Western New York that is interested in having a boot brush station installed on a property that you manage, you can apply through Western New York PRISM's Boot Brush Station program. Not only do we provide the sign design to our partners, but we also provide all of the materials free of charge. All our partners need to do is install the boot brush sign and send us a photo of it after it is installed. This year, we put out applications on our Boot Brush Station program webpage, which is under the Resources heading on our website. This page will be updated with the application when it reopens next year, and an announcement will also be sent out through the listserv. The application is pretty straightforward and includes contact information, property information, the species you'd like featured on the sign, and lastly, information on how to get the materials to you, including both a Home Depot location for picking up some materials and a shipping address for others. As I mentioned before, this year I believe we had 7 applications that we accepted. We have not sent out that material yet, but we will in the coming months, hopefully. So then from here on out, I'm going to be talking about the construction of boot brush stations. All of the materials pictured here are all of the materials necessary to build a boot brush station, minus the sign. I will preface this by saying that there are a lot of different ways to construct boot brush stations, but I'm going to specifically talk about the details regarding the design that we used for boot brush stations that we have made. But also, these are all the same materials and the same instructions that we hand out to partners for our boot brush program. I must say that it is cost-effective and it's pretty easy with the right tools. I will also say that by no means am I an expert, and pretty much any time we make a boot brush station, we get a little bit better at it and might do it a little bit differently. It all depends on the site and the equipment that's available to you at the time. So like I said, in this slide here, we are outlining all of the materials that we give to you through our boot brush program. So to go through them pretty quickly, this first one up is a 4 by 4 inch piece of wood that is 6 feet long. These are the posts that make up the boot brush station. So you get 2 of these. All of the lumber that we use is pressure treated so that it stands up to the weather a little bit better. Next up, we have this 2 by 6 inch piece of wood that's 8 feet long. You get 1 of these, and this is cut into a couple different pieces. One of these pieces is what the boot brush itself is connected to, and then the 2 other pieces are connected to the sign. And I'll go over that a little bit later with some more descriptive pictures. And then the last piece of lumber that we provide is this 2 foot by 2 foot piece of plywood. This is what you connect the sign to. But I will say that the signs are 2 foot by 18 inches, so you do have to cut this piece of plywood down as well. So next up is cement. We provide 2 bags of 50-pound cement. Or the way that we make our boot brush stations is cementing the posts right into the ground. There are alternatives to that, and I will talk about that a little bit later. If you want something that's maybe a little less permanent, or if you're working in an area that's very rocky and it's hard to dig a 2 foot hole for the posts, you can use something else other than concrete, but we have used it and it's worked very well so far. Next up is all of the hardware, the screws that you put everything together with, the braces that we provide, and I'll talk about that a little bit later with some more pictures. And then finally there's the boot brush itself. For whatever reason, it is called the original scrusher. This piece of equipment can be found in many different places. We happen to buy it from forestry suppliers. On the next slide here, I have all of that same information, but more in a table format. So the aluminum sign, the boot brush sign, is about $40 from Voss Signs. I know that if you get 5 or more, you can get a little bit of a discount there. Shipping, $10. The lumber and the hardware, as I mentioned, we get from Home Depot. And then finally, the last little piece is the boot brush, which we get from forestry suppliers, as I mentioned before. And that's about $40. So altogether, all of this equipment is about $150. So that's really, like I said, pretty cost effective. I've heard of other boot brush techniques where it can be $200 or $300. So $150 is pretty good. But as I mentioned with our boot brush program, you don't have to worry about that cost, you just have to worry about the construction. I do want to mention that there are tools and supplies that you should have on hand before or during the construction of your boot brush station. These are all things that we do not provide through our program, sorry about that. The post hole digger or an auger is helpful when you're digging the holes for the posts, especially in areas that might be a little bit rocky, a little bit harder to get through with your regular shovel. So it would be great to have a power drill and drill bits out there with you. I would suggest at least one power drill, if not multiple, depending on what you have available to you at home. And then having multiple drills also makes it so that you don't have to switch out drill bits every once in a while for the different size screws that you're using. Next up is a level. That's always very helpful in this construction. You want to make sure that it's not all wonky and leaning over to one side. So having that level is really helpful, making sure that everything is level up and down and side to side as you are constructing. And then saws, be it circular, reciprocal, chainsaw. These are all helpful as needed to cut the lumber. Chainsaws are helpful because you can bring those out into the field with you. Otherwise, those other saws, it's, you know, if you have it at home or if you don't, that's kind of up to you. And then other supplies. So for the cement, to mix the cement, you need water. I think it's about 1 gallon per 50-pound bag. Always good to bring a little extra, of course. And then any kind of personal protective equipment is always good to have, of course. Work gloves, safety glasses, first aid kits, just in case, you never know. Like I said, there are a few things that you can do at home before you head out to the site to construct the boot brush station. And anything you can do at home just helps save you time, save you energy. So first thing that you can do is cut those posts at a 45-degree angle on one end, and I have a picture of that on the next couple slides. You want to cut both posts at 45-degree angles. This is where your sign is going to be situated. And then you want to cut this 2x6 piece of wood into 3 different sections. And even after you cut the 3 pieces that you need, you're still going to have some wood left over because it is a pretty long piece. So you cut one piece of this, and it's 17 inches wide. And this is to connect the boot brush station to close to the ground. And I have more pictures that will make this all much clearer in the next couple slides. So then the other 2 pieces that you're cutting out of this 8-foot piece of wood they are 18 inches long. And those are going to be to attach the sign to later. And then, as I mentioned, you want to cut this plywood so that instead of the 2-foot by 2-foot that it comes in, it's going to be 2-foot by 18 inches, because that's how big the signs are. So all of that you can do at home in your own time before you head out to the site. So, getting started. Like I said, one of the things that you can do at home is cut the posts at 45-degree angles. This is what that looks like. And then, of course, I have to say, please remember to call 811 to have any underground utilities located before you dig. Once you are on site, you can dig the first hole about 2 feet deep. Place the first post into that hole, and then use the sign width to determine where to dig the second hole. Remove any large rocks as you go and try to make the hole at least a foot or so wide so that the post can sit snugly and that there is enough room to mix the cement. From there, you dig the second hole. Place the posts in the ground, making any adjustments necessary. The 6-foot posts that we provide will most likely be a little too tall for any reasonable boot brush station height. You want the post to be about 3.5 feet tall from the ground up. This is a good height for kids and adults so that people aren't straining with it being too tall or bending over with it being too short. The 6-foot posts are probably going to be a little large, so you want to measure and cut off any unwanted inches from each post while you're out in the field. This is where that chainsaw comes in handy. You attach the braces to the 2x6 piece of wood that you had cut previously. And this is, like I said, the piece of wood that the boot brush is going to be secured onto. So you secure this 2x6 piece of wood between the two posts using the 4 silver braces that we provide to you. So this 2x6 piece of wood should be about 10 inches above the ground so that there's room beneath the boot brush, but that people don't have to really strain themselves to brush their boots off and pick their feet up. And I will say that it's nice to have a truck or something similar out there with you so that you can work in a truck bed and a tailgate rather than having to work on the ground. But obviously you're going to work with whatever you have available to you. So from there, you will have this H shape with the 2 posts and the 2x6 piece of wood in between. So the next step is to place this H-shaped combination of pieces into the 2 holes that have already been dug and make sure that everything is level. Make any adjustments necessary, maybe dig one hole a little bit deeper or wider, or refill one of the holes a little bit, whatever you got to do to make everything all nice and level. Next step, you want to screw these side wood pieces onto the posts. So this is those 2 other sections of the 2x6 piece of wood. You screw one onto each post, onto that 45-degree angle. And then from there, you secure the plywood onto those 2 pieces of wood. I will make a note that the signs come with pre-cut holes for screws, and there are 4 right in the corners of the signs. When you are attaching the plywood to the wood underneath it, I would suggest avoiding the very corners so that the screws for the signs are not hitting those screws. So then, obviously, the next step is attaching the sign. So you do that with the pre-cut holes, and I will mention that you want to make sure that the screws that you're using on this part of the construction are not too long so that they don't come through the other side. The last thing you want is for people to be grabbing onto the boot brush station to leverage themselves to brush their boots off and then cut their hand on a screw that's hanging out the other side. So that's really important to take note of as you're constructing this boot brush station. Next, you attach the boot brush. So this part is pretty easy. It comes with all of its own hardware in the package that you get from forestry suppliers. You have to take part of the brush apart to get the screws in where you need them and then put them back in. So from here, then you check everything is level again, then you mix the cement. You want to alternate between cement mix and water, and you're doing this right into the hole. Mix well as they are being added. You can use any kind of piece of wood or a stick nearby that's going to hold up and mix something that you don't need for the rest of the boot brush station construction. And then lastly, if necessary, you can add braces for the whole boot brush station to set overnight. This usually is not super necessary. By the time you're ready to leave, the cement is already starting to set, but as an extra precaution, you can add these braces and come and remove them the next day. So I will mention that pretty much every boot brush station will require at least a little bit of maintenance. Depending on how high use of an area you are constructing this boot brush station in, you may have to replace the brush every once in a while. I would say a very high use area such as state parks, those high use areas are probably going to require you to replace the boot brush, the brush part specifically, maybe once a year. I'd say check on those, just making sure Once the bristles are worn down and they're not as rigid, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. You also want to check every once in a while to make sure that there's not just huge piles of dirt building up or, a huge pile of weeds that are growing from all the seeds that are being left behind. That's great, but it just requires a little bit of maintenance on your end. And then I will also say it's also good to check graffiti, vandalism. I will mention that at one of our Erie County preserves that we built, one of our boot brush stations, we did have someone, for whatever reason, decided to take the signs off. So we had to order new signs and then install the signs again, and we went to Home Depot and found these things called anti-theft screws. So those were an easy fix to that kind of not great experience. So that's also something that you can think of depending on the area that you are building your boot brush stations. So I'm just going to talk about some alternative ideas to the very basic construction that we just talked about. There are many ways that you can mount these signs. This is a sign from Rhinestone Woods Nature Preserve in Depew. They decided to use a little frame, a little extra wood to frame it. Obviously it looks a little bit more professional, a little bit more cleaned up, so that's great. Another option is putting it under glass. So in this picture here on the right-hand side, the whole sign is under glass and framed, so that will make it so that vandalism or graffiti is that much harder to do. And then finally, you could also, depending on where you are installing this boot brush, if there's a nearby building or a kiosk that is available, you could set up your sign in there and then just set up your boot brush off to the side. The picture in the middle here is from Virgin Swamp Preservation Society in Genesee County. There are obviously different options, and these are just a few as far as mounting the signs. But obviously any additions may cost you a little bit more than that $150 that we talked about previously. And obviously any kind of additions like this, we will not be providing to you through our Western Europe Prism boot brush program. So then also there are definitely a bunch of different ways that you can mount the brushes. The picture on the top left-hand corner is the same station at Rhinestone Woods. They installed a little bitty gravel bed, and you can see the picture below that is a quite larger gravel bed. And the gravel bed is nice because it might minimize the maintenance that you have to do for your boot brush stations, minimize the amount of weeds that can grow. But obviously that requires gravel, it requires a little bit more lumber, depending on what you want to do, how much money you want to spend. I will also mention that in the gravel bed picture down on the bottom left, they have these things called post anchors. So that is an alternative to cementing the boot brush stations into the ground. Say if you don't want them as permanent, or if you can't dig holes into a very rocky area, these post anchors are another option. So those are about $25 each, depending on where you pick those up. And then another one that I wanted to mention is if you look at the picture on the top right-hand corner, that is called a mounting plate. So that's going to cost you about $20, and that's just an alternative to using the wood, the 2x6 piece of wood that we use. And it just makes it so that the dirt can fall right through the boot brush down onto the ground rather than building up on the piece of wood that we provide to you. So like I said, same thing. These are all additions that you can think about, but we do not provide those through our program. I just want to mention too that for the boot brush stations, not every single invasive species is going to be targeted with these boot brush stations. If you think about species that have wind-blown seeds or seeds that attach to clothing very quickly, like burdocks, those kind of invasive species are really not going to be targeted through this boot brush station. But the ones that are those with small and hard seeds. So I have a few up here highlighted. First one being garlic mustard. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this species. It is extremely common in our area. It is a biennial flowering plant that forms rosettes in its first year, and then it bolts and forms flowers and seed in its second year. So like I said, this one is very, very common, and you'll see it along hiking trails. I'm pretty positive of that. It's good to leave it where you found it instead of taking it to a new place. even no matter how common it is. And then we always have to talk about our early detection species on these webinars, of course. So Japanese silkgrass is one of our early detection species. It is an annual grass that spreads via seeds. It is a warm season grass, so right now it's probably not poking its head out yet. It's more likely that you'll see seedlings start in June, and it really is only easy to identify in, say, July and August when it starts to develop that silver midrib that you can see in that picture there. So please be on the lookout for this species. Erie County is a bit of a hot spot for it right now, but thankfully it is not really found in other counties of Western New York. Not much, at least. As I said, these species, they have very small seeds that can easily be picked up by a boot on a trail, and that's why they can easily be left behind on that trail too, with the boot brush station. And then the other species that we have here, mile a minute, honeysuckle, buckthorn, privet, and Japanese barberry, all of those species are, other than mile a minute, they are very common, and they spread by fruits which have seeds in them, and those can be picked up on boots as well. I will say that mile a minute is not common. It's only found in one county of Western New York right now, so that is another one to be on the lookout for, even though I do not have a picture of that up right now. The last slide I have for you today is basically just asking if you are an avid hiker and you do go out on the trails throughout Western New York or anywhere really, and there aren't boot brush stations available, we just suggest that you maybe invest in buying one of these handheld brushes, handheld boot brushes, or I think the picture on the left is like a typical cleaning brush for a bathroom or a kitchen. But anything really works that has those rigid bristles that can get into the treads of your boots to get the seeds out. I would suggest if there are not boot brush stations at a favorite hike of yours, then please use one of these and leave those invasive species behind. We got to do what we can to stop the spread. And with that, that is about it. And I do have to give a plug for our next webinar. It's basically an Ask an Expert webinar series. We will have all of our full-time employees listening in to that webinar, and we can answer any questions that come to mind. So as I said, my name is Lucy Nuessle, the Terrestrial Project Manager for Western New York PRISM, and I put the information for Emily Thiel, our Education and Outreach Program Manager here, because she would be the person to talk to about our boot brush program and partnering with PlayCleanGo. And I will say that this, in addition to our 2 previous webinars, are available on our website now. Under the Resources tab, there is a Presentation and Webinar tab, so please check those out. And I want to thank everyone for joining us.